She stood across the room, the late afternoon light catching in her hair like it knew exactly how to tempt me without saying a word. I watched her from the doorway, pretending not to, and felt the quiet pull that had nothing to do with anything I'd ever known. She was effortless, the kind of woman who commanded a room without raising her voice, yet somehow made every space smaller, every corner warmer, every second heavier. Her name was Elena, and she was in her mid-40s, but the years only seemed to sharpen her presence, not dull it. There was a grace in the way she moved, a slow fluidity that suggested she'd learned the value of time, of patience, of pause. And yet in the subtle arch of her brow, the way her lips pressed together for just a fraction too long before she smiled, there was vulnerability, like a crack in porcelain that drew you closer, silently daring you to touch. I, on the other hand, was young. 23, I told myself, old enough to know better, too young to understand completely. And yet, I couldn't stop staring. I didn't mean to, but my hands curled at my sides as if they were tied to my fascination. My eyes caught the way she adjusted a stray lock of hair over her ear, and for a moment, the world shrank to that motion, to the delicate brush of her fingers against her skin. When she finally looked at me, the effect was immediate, a warmth that settled in my chest and didn't leave. She didn't speak, just let her gaze linger a second too long, and I could swear I felt her pulse in the faint tremor of her hands. My own fingers twitched, half wanting to reach for her, half terrified to break the spell. "I didn't hear you come in," she said softly, her voice low and warm, carrying just the slightest hesitation, like a note held too long in a song. I didn't want to interrupt. I stammered, my words clumsy, betraying how aware I was of her nearness. She laughed lightly, a sound that seemed almost shy but still carried confidence, and it brushed against me like silk. My shoulder brushed hers as I stepped closer to offer a tray of tea, and the contact was lightning quick, the kind that makes your stomach flip, makes your skin remember before your brain can even catch up. "Careful," she said, not looking at me, but tracing her fingers over the edge of the table. "You're making it difficult to focus." Her eyes lifted briefly, catching mine, and in that glance, I felt everything unsaid. Desire, restraint, curiosity. A quiet acknowledgement that neither of us belonged in this simple moment, but couldn't stop ourselves from inhabiting it anyway. I swallowed hard, aware of how loud my heartbeat sounded in my ears. The air between us thickened, charged, a weight that didn't need words. I wanted to say something brilliant, charming, memorable, but instead I only managed a small, awkward smile that she returned, and it was enough. And then it happened. The door behind us creaked, startling in its suddenness. She froze, just for a heartbeat, her eyes flicking toward the sound. I felt the shift in the room instantly. The tension didn't vanish. It simply paused, held in suspension, waiting for the next impossible second we might steal for ourselves. Her glance returned to me, sharp and questioning, almost teasing, and I realized nothing about this would be simple. Not the way I wanted to lean closer, not the way she smiled without warning, not the way a single room could feel so impossibly small for two people who barely dared to exist in the same space. And somewhere in that suspended second, I knew, whatever this was, whatever it might become, it was dangerous. I never knew how quiet a room could feel until I realized how loud my own thoughts were around her. Elena had a way of occupying space that made the edges of the world blur, leaving only her, and somehow me, though I tried not to admit it. She was brushing a fine layer of dust from the shelves when I noticed it. The subtle arch of her collarbone, the faint curve of her wrist, delicate yet confident. She paused, glanced at me over her shoulder, and I caught the briefest flicker of something unspoken. A shadow behind her eyes that hinted at stories I would never fully know. Loneliness, perhaps, or maybe just a caution honed by experience. I tried to tell myself it was just curiosity, that noticing her, being aware of the way her fingers hovered near mine, the way she sometimes tilted her head as if listening for more than words, was harmless. But the truth was heavier. Each glance, each accidental brush of skin, carried an electricity that felt almost criminal. She shifted, coming closer to adjust a book on the top shelf, and her shoulder brushed mine. The contact lasted a fraction longer than it should have. I felt it, a warmth that lingered even after she pulled back, careful not to show that she felt it too. My chest tightened, and I had to remind myself to breathe normally, even as my fingers itched with the desire to reach for her. It was impossible not to notice how the world had taught her to hold back. There was grace in it, yes, but also caution, a subtle line drawn between desire and decorum. I suspected there were past disappointments behind that poised exterior, stories of being underestimated or dismissed, moments when trust had been a fragile thing. And yet here she was, leaning just a little too close when handing me a pen, letting her presence hover near me without fully landing. I remembered her laugh from yesterday, soft but sharp in its awareness, and I thought of my own hesitations. Social perception, age, the inevitable whispers that would follow if anyone noticed the way we were drawn to each other. And still, I found myself wanting the impossible, wanting her to let her guard slip just enough for me to see what lay beneath. Our conversation was casual, polite even, but the air between us thickened with every pause. Her breath brushed my ear as she explained something about a project she was passionate about, and for a moment, words were irrelevant. The world outside that room faded. All that existed was the soft friction of proximity, the almost imperceptible weight of a shared glance, the unspoken understanding that something dangerous was unfolding. And then, almost accidentally, our hands met. Mine rested against hers for a heartbeat too long. Hers didn't pull away immediately. The electricity surged, a quiet confirmation that neither of us wanted to acknowledge. We were tethered, invisible threads binding us in a moment that was ours alone. She pulled back finally, offering a small, knowing smile, one that said more than words ever could. And I realized this wasn't about temptation or folly. It was about recognition. A recognition that in each other, we had found something familiar, something forbidden, something impossible to ignore. The afternoon sun had slipped behind the blinds, leaving streaks of gold and shadow across the room. I was kneeling on the floor, helping Elena rearrange a pile of old papers, and somehow the world had narrowed to this small rectangle of space. Her shoulder brushed mine as she leaned over, and I felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. We worked in silence, the kind of silence that hums louder than words. I wanted to say something, anything, but each time I opened my mouth, the right words vanished. Instead, I noticed her wrist against mine, the delicate tremor in her fingers as she stacked the papers. My pulse picked up, uneven, aware of every tiny movement. "Be careful," she whispered, her voice low, almost a breath against my ear. The proximity made my throat dry. I swallowed, but I couldn't hide the way my body leaned, just a little closer, drawn to her warmth. And then the door clicked. My head jerked up. A friend of hers, someone I barely knew, stood in the doorway, phone in hand, eyes flicking between us. The moment froze. Elena's hand retracted subtly, hers brushing mine as if she'd never touched me at all, but her eyes lingered on mine, a heartbeat too long. We were caught, or at least on the verge of it. Sorry, The visitor started, but Elena waved them off, smiling tightly, smooth, practiced. "It's fine. Just a moment." As soon as the door clicked shut, the tension snapped and then immediately returned, sharper than before. Her proximity felt dangerous again, every inch between us charged. I wanted to lean in, to let my lips hover just at the edge of hers, but I didn't. Hesitation held me, like a fragile wall I couldn't quite dismantle. I should probably have sorted these before," I said, my voice betraying a nervous laugh. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, her hand lingered near mine on the papers. Slowly, deliberately, her fingers brushed mine again, and the contact sent a quiet shock up my arm. I caught myself leaning just a little closer, drawn in by a gravity I couldn't resist. She began, then stopped, biting her lip, a tiny, human hesitation. Her eyes held mine, searching, questioning. Never mind. My chest tightened. That unfinished sentence, that pause, was more intimate than any words we could have said. The air between us was thick, filled with things unspoken. Guilt, temptation, fear, desire. I felt her inhale sharply, close enough that I could sense the faint scent of her perfume, the warmth of her skin. And before either of us could step back, our knees brushed. Our shoulders touched again. The distance that should have existed collapsed under our weight. And for a heartbeat, the world held just the two of us, caught between restraint and surrender. We didn't speak. There was no need. In that suspended second, I knew we were closer than ever, even as our minds screamed to resist. And somehow, that closeness made everything impossibly, dangerously real. The room had grown smaller somehow, the evening settling over us like a weight. Elena leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely, but I could see the tension in the curve of her shoulders. My own chest felt tight, a pressure I couldn't name, a desire I couldn't silence. "I don't know why we're doing this," she said quietly, though the sharp edge of her voice betrayed the calm she tried to project. Her eyes searched mine, half pleading, half daring. I stepped closer without thinking. "Doing what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Doing this, whatever this was between us, had become impossible to ignore. She exhaled sharply, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her hand trembled just slightly, and I caught the motion, letting my fingers brush hers in a movement so subtle it might have gone unnoticed. Electricity shot through me, and I realized how close I was leaning. Too close for comfort, yet impossible to retreat. "You know, this is wrong," she murmured. Her voice dropped lower, and I felt it tickle the sensitive skin at my ear. I swallowed hard, aware of the warmth radiating from her body, the way her presence had claimed the air around us. "I don't care if it's wrong," I said, barely more than a whisper. My hand lifted unconsciously, almost touching her cheek, stopping just short, as though proximity itself was confession. She turned toward me, her gaze holding mine, and for a second, the world outside ceased to exist. I could see every subtle motion, the slight tightening of her jaw, the way her breath caught, the gentle rise and fall of her chest. Desire, fear, restraint, all mingled there, visible and unspoken. "I can't. I shouldn't," she said, but she didn't step back. Instead, she leaned just a fraction closer, enough for her shoulders to brush, enough for my hand to itch toward her neck. Her perfume, a soft, lingering warmth, filled my senses. Every rational thought I had tried to assert fled as my heart hammered in my chest. A moment passed, heavy and electric. I wanted to speak, to tell her exactly how I felt, but my voice stuck. Instead, I let my fingers hover at the edge of her hair, brushing it gently behind her ear, and I felt her shiver at the contact. Her eyes fluttered down briefly, then back to mine, and in that motion was a confession neither of us voiced, that we had crossed a threshold we could never undo. And then she breathed in sharply, just as my lips hovered a breath away from hers. The anticipation was unbearable, every nerve alive, every heartbeat loud, every second stretching impossibly long. The world held its breath with us. One movement, one decision, and everything would change. One kiss. That's all it would take. But before it could happen, the faint click of a door, somewhere distant but immediate, made us both freeze. Her body stiffened, my hand faltered midair. Eyes met, wide and searching, and in that suspended instant, everything we had wanted and feared pressed against us like a storm waiting to break. The quiet of the evening was shattered by a text ping from my phone. I glanced down, expecting something mundane, and froze. It was from her niece. A single line, "Did you two almost?" I felt my stomach drop. My hand, still hovering near my pocket, trembled slightly. I looked up at Elena, who had been adjusting a picture frame, pretending not to notice, but the way her fingers tightened around the edge betrayed her. Her eyes flicked toward mine, wide, sharp, and impossibly alive. You read that?" she asked softly, voice low, a hint of panic threading through it. Her chest rose and fell faster than normal, and the faint scent of her perfume seemed to cling closer to me. I shook my head, trying to calm the sudden rush of adrenaline and desire. No, I didn't, but my fingers itched to touch her, to steady myself against the magnetic pull she had over me. Her body shifted slightly, leaning toward me as if drawn, then immediately pulled back, the subtle motion of temptation and restraint flickering across her features. I felt a pulse of heat in my own chest, frustration, longing, the sharp ache of being dangerously near. "You're careful," she murmured, almost to herself, though her gaze was locked on me. Her lips parted slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the tension we'd been tiptoeing around. And yet, she didn't finish, but the pause stretched long enough for my mind to fill in what she meant. I took a step closer, and she mirrored me, hesitant, almost like we were moving in a delicate dance neither wanted to end. Our knees brushed accidentally, sending a shiver through both of us. Her hand hovered near mine, brushing against it with casual intensity that was anything but casual. "I shouldn't feel this way," she said, her voice breaking slightly on the last word. "But I do." Everything in me wanted to reach for her, to claim the admission, but fear and circumstance held me back. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, the unspoken danger between us sharper. And yet, every hesitation, every trembling hand, every brush of skin only drew us closer. "I feel it too," I confessed, voice low, almost lost in the space between us. My fingers hovered near her arm, daring to linger, tracing a path I shouldn't, yet couldn't resist. She shivered at the contact, her eyes glistening in the dim light. The truth hung between us, impossible to ignore. We were on the brink of something that could change everything, and there was no turning back. Her lips parted slightly, as if to speak, and I leaned in instinctively, drawn by a gravity we could no longer resist. Every rational thought fled. Every heartbeat echoed in my ears. And then she paused, looking away for the briefest moment, her hand brushing past mine again in a gesture that was both hesitant and intimate. It was a decision, silent, fragile, electric. A decision to move forward despite everything, to lean closer despite the risk, to acknowledge that the moment we'd feared and desired was finally within reach. The room was smaller than it had ever felt. Every shadow seemed sharper, every sound louder. Elena stood in front of me, barely a step away, and I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the subtle pull that made rational thought impossible. "I shouldn't," she whispered, voice trembling, as though admitting it aloud might break something delicate between us. Her fingers hovered near mine, restless, a silent plea and a challenge all at once. I reached out, just a fraction, letting my hand brush hers. The contact was electric, not a grand gesture, but enough to send awareness spiraling through both of us. Her breath caught, soft and quick, and I realized that whatever caution we had built around ourselves was crumbling piece by piece. "I can't stop thinking about you," I admitted, my voice low, almost a vibration in the tight air. The words felt dangerous, but necessary. Her eyes softened, searching mine for honesty, for reassurance, for permission to lean into the moment we had both fought and feared. Her hand finally settled in mine, small but confident. The contact sent a shiver up my arm, a quiet acknowledgement that we were choosing each other, if only for this instant. She stepped closer, and my chest brushed hers, small motions, careful, yet intimate. Every heartbeat was amplified. "I've never," she began, then faltered, lips parting as if to admit a truth too large to contain. Her words were caught somewhere between fear and longing, but the look in her eyes said everything: desire, hesitation, recognition. I lifted a hand slowly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, letting my fingertips graze the line of her jaw. She leaned into the touch, eyes closing for the briefest moment, and the air between us became thick with everything we had avoided: shame, longing, curiosity, and a quiet surrender. We didn't speak. Words weren't necessary anymore. The world outside the room faded, leaving only us, two flawed humans standing on the precipice of something irreversible. Her lips hovered close enough to mine that I could feel the warmth, the rhythm of her breath, the tremor that betrayed the restraint she still clung to. Then, finally, we made the choice, a subtle shift, a surrender in posture, a hand tightening around mine. Not a kiss, not yet, but a commitment, a recognition that whatever the consequences, whatever the risk, we would face it together. Our foreheads touched lightly, breath mingling, eyes locked, and I understood her completely in that instant. The courage it took to step this close, the fear of the world's judgment, the quiet longing that had haunted her for years. "Understand," I whispered, voice low, certain. "And she replied, barely audible, a tremor of relief threading through the words. We stood there, inches apart, bodies humming with unspoken electricity, hearts racing in tandem. The danger, the taboo, the risk, it didn't vanish, but it no longer mattered. We had chosen, finally, to acknowledge what had always been real. And in that fragile, suspended second, clarity settled over us like light. Messy, imperfect, human, undeniable. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the room, gentle and forgiving. Elena sat in the armchair, coffee in hand, and I settled beside her on the edge of the sofa, close enough that our knees brushed lightly. The tension that had once felt unbearable now softened into something entirely different, a quiet intimacy that didn't need grand gestures or words. She looked at me, a small smile tugging at her lips, and I noticed how effortless it seemed now. The vulnerability that had once flickered like a warning light was still there, but tempered by the choice we had made. By stepping closer when fear and caution screamed to stay apart. "Last night, I was terrified," she admitted, voice low, almost shy, yet steady. "Not of you, just everything else. How people would see it. How I would feel." I reached over, brushing her hand with mine. The gesture was simple, human, but it carried years of longing, hesitation, and courage in a single touch. "I was too," I said softly. "But I'm glad we didn't step back." Her eyes softened, and without thinking, she leaned in, resting her forehead against mine. The warmth of her skin, the rhythm of her breath mingling with mine, the subtle squeeze of her hand in mine. It was enough. No words could improve on this. We didn't need to talk about age or expectations anymore. The space between us, the invisible walls built by doubt and perception, had dissolved. Our fingers intertwined naturally, comfortably, as if they had always been meant to fit together. I could feel her heartbeat in the gentle press of her palm, and it mirrored mine, chaotic and steady at the same time. "Do you ever think it'll be complicated?" I asked, quiet, careful. She tilted her head, brushing a loose strand of hair from my forehead, and smiled. "Yes," she said, "but not impossible. Not with this. Not with us." I laughed softly, relief flooding through me. "I think I could get used to this," I said. She leaned back just slightly, but didn't release my hand. Her thumb traced small, absent-minded circles over mine, and I felt a warmth that wasn't just physical. It was a calm, a connection, a quiet acknowledgement that we had crossed thresholds together, fear, desire, hesitation, and come out whole on the other side. The room was quiet except for the soft clink of her coffee mug and the distant hum of life outside. But here, in this small corner of the world, everything felt exactly as it should. Imperfect, human, intimate. We could sit like this for hours, and it would be enough. I pressed a soft kiss to her temple, a small, grounding gesture, and she smiled against me. "We'll figure it out," she murmured. "Together." And for the first time in a long while, I believed it. We stayed like that, fingers intertwined, foreheads touching, hearts in sync. There were no promises needed, no declarations necessary. Only the quiet, undeniable truth that we had found each other, against the odds, and weren't letting go.